Well, good afternoon, guys. Thanks so much for showing up today. Really appreciate it. It's a awesome day. I was really, we're gonna be in here for a little bit. I've got a lot of slides, but I really want to kind of run through them fast and kind of give you guys like a broad overview of earthworks, of permaculture design, but just kind of like the broad spectrum of it. And then I'd like to go out to the farm where we did the permaculture installation and just kind of walk around, check it out, run through some of that. I've tried to weave in kind of a little bit about my history in some of the pictures, and most of, the applicable history is kind of building on a big scale and farming and gardening, and somehow I've managed to weave all this together. And so I'll just go right in. So everything really comes back to water. I mean, we've got all kinds of, political problems. We've got monetary problems. We've got this, that, and the other. But it all really weaves back into water. Water is the key feature. And in this climate, we don't really think about it too much. I mean, most of us are blessed with water. We have an abundance of water. You look out the window here, there's water flowing. This farm, in fact, has like 6 springs, and it's a seep. So we have plenty of water here, and most of us experience, water daily without any problems. But overall, like the big picture, water is definitely a problem for a large percentage of people on the earth. I mean, I'm not going to go into a lot of, the numbers, but I mean, it's really astounding. A couple of them are, the UN says that there's water scarcity for like 40% of the people on the earth. And then over 1 billion people don't have access to water daily. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to live without water, So what I love about permaculture is you look at solutions. So you may spend like 5% of the time, kind of talking about problems. And then really you want to spend the rest of the time like trying to figure out solutions. Because that's really what it's all about. And, one of the mantras in permaculture is the problem is the solution. So we're always looking at, how we can improve on what the problem is. And around here, and this goes globally, really, rainwater harvesting is something that we don't really do a whole lot. It's, we're starting to tout it. People are starting to collect it off of their roofs, but it's just a minor part of our water source now. And that could be really expanded to a great deal. And really the problem is that we only have so many different sources of water we can work with. We have well water, which is groundwater, and that is really the problem. It's being pumped out of the ground. And in a lot of places, we're irrigating with it. So we're taking the water out of the aquifers, and because we've deforested and we're not channeling the water back in anymore into the aquifers. So a lot of times what you have is water that gains velocity and accelerates because we have so much hard surface now. So we got all these roads, all the houses, all the roofs, all the developments, and water sheds off, and it flows out into our creeks, and it flies away, and it's taking nutrients and sediment with it, and so that's kind of like, that's the big problem. That's a problem, but in it is a solution because we can collect that water. It's clean water, and we could work with it, and we could work to recharge the groundwater, and to me, that's like critical. And I think in this country, out west, we've been experiencing a few years, in Atlanta, water shortages. But I think overall, there's a good potential that this is going to become more of the norm with what we're dealing with is going to be shortages, and the water's not as clean as it has been. So what we need to do is figure out solutions to capture that water, to recycle that water and use it. So I'm pretty psyched about the possibilities. So that's just a lotus at our little pond. And it's like I was saying, it's really all about rainwater harvesting. So we have groundwater that we could pump from. We have springs that's also groundwater that some people get their rainfall from. You know, we have the oceans, which it's expensive to desalinate the water and to use it. But we don't have a whole lot of other sources besides rainfall, you know, groundwater and rainfall. So rainwater is basically the only source of water that on a personal level, because most of us live in a house and have a piece of property, that's really the only source generally that we can work with and improve. So we want to think about rainwater as something that we could work with. You know, in some states in this country, it has become illegal to collect rainwater and to impound it, and it's being taxed. But North Carolina is not one of them, and we need to establish as many of these systems as we can, and that way they're grandfathered in. So what I do is permaculture, and permaculture, it's like there's no easy way to explain what permaculture is except that it is a design system. Permaculture isn't really organic gardening. It's not, there are specifics in permaculture, but what makes permaculture special is that it's a design system. So we have ways of analyzing a piece of land, and there's different methods of design. So in permaculture, it's been set up that you have different ways of analyzing a piece of land. So one of those is the scale of permanence. And that basically means you have certain things that are inherent on a piece of land. And it starts really broad. You know, that's climate, where you live, that's land geography, and then it kind of starts narrowing down. But if you you take the broad and you start working down, then you could be very specific and have a way of working with your piece of land. You know, as opposed to organic gardening or biodynamics or whatever, permaculture actually has a frame to work in. You know, all these other practices are really good, but I started out as a biodynamic farmer and a builder and got a piece of land with my family, and we developed it. What was awesome, it is awesome, but without having some prerequisite design flow, something to work through that could kind of help you, guide you through the process, you're basically left just to now it's a little easier, you can gather information online and stuff, but it's really like hit and miss. It's like, okay, I think this would work here, let's try this, let's try that. And you know, I spent basically 10, 15 years on our piece of land building up stuff just to realize, man, this is a lot of extra work we're putting in daily because things aren't working. We have erosion on our land. We're not building up fertility on our land. And spent basically the last 5 years redesigning it and rebuilding it. Now, if I had the hindsight, and if I would have gotten into permaculture, the design side of it early on, that would have sped up the whole process. So it's really important. And I kind of see permaculture is like an analogy. It's kind of like a bookshelf, you know? It's a structure, and then we have these individual pieces that go into it. And you could put, like I said, you could put organic gardening. You could put biodynamics. You can put aquaculture. You can put whatever it may be, it can go in there. But permaculture gives you a structure to work with each of those. And it speeds up and enhances your process. So scale of permanence is basically thinking like mainframe. Like how can we step back on a piece of land and think about it as broadly as we can? So we're looking at sun angle, we're looking at the topography, how it lays, and then we work on down. In the scale of permanence, you have like the most permanent pieces on your land are, your buildings and your access, your driveways. It may be, well, it's definitely your water. So it's thinking about how you can work in the mainframe. So it's starting with that broad picture. And it's not that you have to attack the mainframe first, the big pieces, but I think it's going to help you flow through your process on your piece of land. So there's a whole scale of permanence, and that's super easy to work through, and it's laid out. The other way of looking at a piece of land is kind of a sector plan. Now, basically a sector plan is you're just making a big circle and you're putting your house and your farm right in the middle. And then from that middle point, you're kind of looking outwards, and you're not drawing in anything specific as far as anything detailed, life size or anything like that. What you're doing is, if you were standing on that center and you're looking outward, it's basically what you're perceiving coming in at you. So it could be this area, not specific this area over here, but this area is sun angle. We're getting our summer sun. This could be our winter sun. So we lay that on that circle, kind of in a pie shape. This could be a wind sector. Like this is where our wind's coming from. That kind of just gets in your mind kind of the way to think about things. If your wind's coming from this way, then you're going to think about how you can protect certain things from the wind, maybe some wind breaks, maybe how you can benefit from the wind. On the other farm, we installed a windmill. It could be something like, this is your view, so you don't want to impede that. It could be a wildlife corridor. It could be, we don't have it so much around here, but it could be where fires come from in that direction. So that all kind of helps you orientate like what you're going to do on that piece. And it's not specific, but it's just kind of broad, kind of you're laying it out, and it gives you a way of looking at your piece of land. And the other one I really love is the zone plan. And the zone plan is basically 5 or 6 different zones working from the heart of your land, kind of from your home, and working outward. So zone 1, it could be like your propagation house, something that you've got to go to every day. You don't want to put that in zone 5 because you're like walking an extra half a mile, or, it could be right down the hill, but still bringing things in close that you have to do daily. Quiet animals around your house. Chickens aren't super quiet, but chickens that you could take care of and different things. Plants that you want to tend daily, or maybe your kitchen gardens, things like that. And you kind of progressively, you're working out into these different zones, and it's neat because nothing is like set in stone and you have to do it one way. You could have this zone 5 where you have trees and you may have pasture, and you may have some of that comes right close to your house, and then you may have another zone that kind of curls in this way. And it's just a way to kind of start thinking about your piece of property, how you can zone it out. And then the other way is the pattern recognition. And it's really everywhere. It's looking at patterns. It's looking at patterns in nature and how they replicate, and they're always repeating. Patterns always repeat in nature. And any piece of land, has patterns on it that you could start to pick up from. Patterns are really, it's like you have to be the most observant, because it's really, we basically walk through life without thinking about them. We just see it and we don't really take it in, but they give us clues to how the land acts. You can see water patterns, water flow patterns. You can see, there's all kinds of patterns in nature. So these are some of the methods of design that give you a good basis. I'm not going to go too detailed. I just kind of want to keep this broad. So what I do is earthworks. I'm super excited about earthworks. Earthworks is basically altering the land in a harmonious way that can serve your family, can serve you. And it's not just about self, but when you harmonize a piece of land, you're really harmonizing with nature. And so you can increase productivity on a piece of land. You can actually increase wildlife. You can increase biology. Those are all kind of things you can work with earthworks. And it's basically like it says, earthworks. It's working with the earth. It may be creating mounds. It may be creating berms, And why you would want to do it is because it's the most effective way to heal a piece of land. And it's really broad scale. It's thinking kind of broad. But, I think that's important. A lot of us are scared to do things on our piece of land because we don't want to do the wrong thing. But, kind of backing up and having those methods of design in kind of gives us a direction that we can do things. And once we get comfortable with it, then we can create, these broader landscapes. So it basically goes to what's your goal? It's got to start with you. It's got to start with your family. It's got to start, what do you want to create? A lot of times, also, we're not clear about what our goal is on a piece of property. Or what we want out of it, or our interactions, or how much energy and effort we want to put into it over the long run. So it's kind of like thinking out in the future and analyzing what you want, what you're going to want to create, kind of what you want on your piece of land, and then not, pegging yourself in too small. It's kind of doing it to where you have room to grow on a piece of land. You can analyze the capacity of land where it is present, and that's really important. That basically just goes to observation. You can do soil testing, you can have a biologist look at it, you can have a botanist look at it, you can do a lot of things, but it's basically just observing your piece of land. And you always want to look for ways to harmonize. And like I said before, the problem becomes the solution. So you're just going to kind of keep that little mantra going. And really, before we do anything on a piece of property, you want to be super sensitive to, especially the wildlife, but that could be your neighbors. That could be your family members. That could be customs, respecting customs. There's a lot of places, you need to be extra sensitive if you're working where there's ancient customs. So it's just being sensitive to everything on a piece of land is super, super important, because earthworks, you're going broad scale, so you can really kind of mess things up broadly too if you get it wrong. I put together this little chart. I'm not quite finished with it, but it's the scale of ethical decision making. So there are times, plenty of times, where you don't want to do anything on a piece of land. If a piece of land has old growth forest on it, you're not going to want to cut it down to put some berms on there to collect water to try to improve it. You're just going to be degrading the land. So, if it's stable and diverse, you really don't need to do a whole lot. If you lack resources, you never want to do anything on a piece of land if you lack resources. Resources could be time. Resources could be capital, it could be money. It could be understanding, it could be help, it could be equipment. That's all resources. So anytime we lack resources, we need to step back and never do anything until, And also, if it's a sacred piece of land or there's ancestral sites on there, you know, it could be an ancient sacred place. It could have a burial ground on it, anything like that. Obviously, we don't want to do a whole lot. Maybe not going to go through all these for you guys, but I'm going to try to keep this kind of quick so we can get out on the other piece of property. It's nice. But rarely, you know, sometimes even in possibly an old growth area, we can do respectful harvest. My piece of property has old growth hardwood timber on it, and the red oaks are beautiful, but they've got red oak decline. So the tops are breaking out in ice storms. Insects get into them, and they're basically eating the centers out. And then after a few years, the trees just basically die out. And it's incredible, incredible timber. You know, yes, it is very good for the forest to have that timber fall over and that carbon to go back into the forest. But it's also, you know, we can respectfully take some of that out because it's reached the end of its cycle and use it. Sometimes with caution would be a place where there's pioneers on your land. I want you guys to think about a piece of land as and kind of what you do on it and your understanding of it, not in the black and white. To try to know that you're going to be living in the gray zone a lot. Like you're going to have to make decisions that are in the gray zone. So pioneers on a piece of land, pioneers meaning tree species in this area, it could be brambles, briars, it could be poison ivy, locust, you know, you get a lot of pines and things like that. So you could have a piece of land that has forest on it, but it's not old growth, and it's pioneers. And basically what these pioneers do is when a piece of land's been cleared, they shoot up really fast and they start repairing the land. Well, like this one piece of land I work on in Rutherford County, the entire piece of land is pioneers, but it's these little pine trees, and it's really interesting. They grow up out of old pasture when the pasture is left, and you know, per 10 by 10 area, there could be like 30 or 40 of these little pine trees, and they go up, and you know, they're 20, 30 foot tall, and they're never going to reach maturity. They're never going to be a stable, mature species. What they do is they reach up really fast, and then they crowd each other out, and then they all die down, and all that carbon blankets the forest, and you start to see these hardwoods popping up. And if you go back further in the woods, all the hardwoods are taken over. So in that pioneer area, it's not black and white. Yeah, it's forest. Obviously, you don't want to cut forest down to do anything, but you know, that's an area where you could work with. You could clear an area of pioneers very respectfully, and work on it. You know, invasive or transition landscapes. A lot of times, well, I kind of already mentioned it, but even with pioneers, or at the other farm we had, well, we still got, but wisteria. And wisteria is super invasive. You know, there's some old growth wisteria, but, you know, it's not native. It spreads, it takes over, it chokes things out. So, you know, you can work with that. You can feel good about taking that out. And this is just basically a chart just to start to think about how you can proceed on a piece of land. And then always, which is never always, because that's black and white, but severe erosion. If you can work on a piece of land that has severe erosion, you know, you can pretty much go at it because it's already in bad shape and you're just going to improve it. If you can improve the efficiency on a piece of land or productivity and diversity, and then reclamation of industrial sites. Now this is kind of broad, and let me do a quick little survey here. Like, how many of you guys have your own place, or how many of you guys are working on, say, an acre or less, your piece of land? Okay, how about 5 acres or less? Okay. How about, do we got any like 20 acres or less? Yeah? Okay. Anybody, above 20 acres working on a piece of land? Above 100 acres? No? Okay. That's awesome. There's a few people, it seems like maybe like 10% or like an acre or less. And then most of you guys are an acre or more, So that's fairly broad. And even an acre, is a lot of square footage. 43,000 plus square foot on an acre. So I'm going to throw out kind of like, I want to make it specific for you guys because nobody's obviously doing reclamation of industrial sites, but I'm just going to kind of throw out some broader picture stuff that we could think of. And I know this is going to be broadcasted later on, so I just want to add a few things in here that I think will help us out in the future.